Okay, so we'll call this function fizzbuzz2, and so the first thing we had before was a for loop, and so we're iterating through the vector from 1 to 100. Yeah.
Did you get that like template view?
Oh yeah, so that's also a neat feature of RStudio. They have these. This is like a brand new feature, like from this month actually. They're called macros, I think, and so they're like pre-assigned in RStudio. This has nothing to do with R, really. And so for certain like shortcuts, like if I type fun or if I type for, as you can see, it will like autocomplete the word for, and that's like this blue tag, and then the white tag will give you this whole. It will like give you the whole syntax, and that's helpful, definitely. I'm kind of like used to not having that, so it like kind of gets in my way. But and that exists for like matrices, and I honestly don't know that much about it because it's like a very new thing. And that it's just with tab completion. So this is what we had before. So now. We have four scenarios, right? Either the number is divisible by 3 and 5, and you print fizzbuzz. It's divisible by 3 and you print buzz, or it's divisible by just 3 and you print buzz, and it's divisible by just 5 and then you print fizz. So. Or I got those mixed up. It's 3 fizz, 5 buzz. So we've got conditions here. So we want to start with an if statement because we know we're going to be testing whether or not the numbers we're iterating through are divisible by 3 or 5. So the most restrictive case, so like, you've got... you're kind of like in a situation of like a Venn diagram where you've got numbers that are divisible by 3, numbers that are divisible by 5, and then numbers that are divisible by 3 and 5. So this is the smallest set, and this is like the most restrictive set. And so when we're forming this if statement, we want to start off thinking about like in this. We want to start thinking about what is like the strictest rule. For the tasks that we want to complete. So the strictest rule is that a number is divisible by 3 and it's also divisible by 5. You guys see that? Okay. So to test divisibility is like a whole other problem because just how do you do that? We're going through numbers. So for now, let's assign I to have the value 1, since that's the first value it's going to have. So does 5 or 3 divide into 1? No, but how do we know that, and how do we form an expression that will evaluate to some logical value? So you can test whether or not one number divides into another number using the modulus operator. So, in my example before, we said 12 mod 5. 12 mod 5 returns 2 because 5 goes in twice, and then 2 is left over. To see if something goes in easily, to see if a number goes in evenly, we can put that number on the left-hand side of the modulus operator, and if this expression I mod 5 evaluates to 0, then we know that that number goes in evenly. So we can form this into a logical expression by using the logical operator of the equal sign, and then testing whether or not this expression I mod 5 is in fact equal to 0. And that'll give us a true value or a false value. And based on that value, we can do something inside of our if statement. So we have to test whether I is divisible by 5, and then we can use the exact same logic to test whether I is divisible by 3. Does everyone understand that? And please, modulus is like not something that people deal with all the time, so like please stop me if you want me to go over any of this again. And just to be very clear, the order of operations in R is such that mathematical operations are done first. So this modulus is a mathematical operation, as with the plus sign or the multiplication sign, B, and then the logical operators are evaluated. The logical operators have their own order of operations, and I can get into that if you want me to, but it's also on the course page in the lecture notes about the logical operators. So we've got two logical expressions here that are generalized because we're using a variable, this variable I, instead of using just hard numbers. So we can test whether both of these things, if we want to print fizzbuzz, if both things are true, it's the most restrictive case. So we can say that if this expression, in fact, if we can say even if this expression is true, and using the and logical operator, this expression is true, then inside of this if statement we can do something, and the thing we're going to do is to print fizzbuzz. So now we've got this. So now we've got one case. We're done with a quarter of what we wanted to do. And now the question is, how do we make it do fizz or buzz? That is, that's a simple thing to do. And the thing that I'm thinking about right now is that is to show you how this is a good example of chaining of chaining if and else statements together. So the syntax for doing this is that after the last curly bracket of this if statement, you write else, and then you start another if statement. And so we can just borrow the logical expressions that we came up with before and say that if I mod 3 is equal to 0, then print, I think, fizz. So went through the fizz, yeah. And then we can borrow this whole expression that we just wrote for the next part of this else if chain, which is that else if I mod 5 is equal to 0, we just print buzz. And then the last part of this is that if none of the above expressions are true, we can just say, if none of these expressions after the if statement evaluate to true, then, or else, print the number. And so this should do it. So so this is another thing. So I highlighted all of this and then entered this into the R console. You can also start at the first line and hit Command Enter and walk through the entire function until you get this greater than sign back in the console, and that will also place this function into your global environment. And so then if we execute the function by saying fizzbuzz2 with these parentheses, it does what we wanted it to do. And as you can see, 13, 14, 15 is divided by 3 and 5, and so it prints fizzbuzz. does anyone have questions about this? So I want to, just looking around at some people's code, I want to say some things, which is that um, uh, it doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to like any professional who's reading your code, um, what how you structure the syntax, as long as there's some uh, order. So like I saw some people putting putting brackets like slightly different places, and that's fine, as long as whatever you do is consistent, and like there's some ordering or some like rhyme or reason to what you're doing. Um, some people were typing out these statements like all the way to the right where they were like going off the page. I like to, in fact, if you make this smaller, I always keep a ruler in my text editors to like usually 80 characters. People do 70 characters. It's up to people's preferences, but it just keeps the code more readable. And if someone is looking at your code and you're, whether it's me or whether it's someone in the future who's trying to understand what you wrote, it's the skinnier you can keep things, usually the easier it is to read. So if let's say that I switched this expression with this expression, somebody who hasn't answered a lot of things, what would happen? What would the first, if I sourced this function and then I ran this function, what would the first 5 printed lines be? Go ahead. Wait, what did you say at the end? I'm sorry.
The first 5 digits that are divisible by 3, like between 0 and 15. Right?
Oh.
Would it look at the first statement first?
So I'm sorry. What was your answer? I'm sorry.
3, 6, 9, 12, and 15.
Okay, so.
Oh, sorry, no, then it would print FizzBuzz. Never mind, I got confused.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
So it would. So okay. So let's okay. Do you have an answer? Oh no, sorry. I thought you were. All right. So let's like just walk through this step by step, because I think that's what we need to do. So you're starting off this for loop. What's the value? What's the first value that I takes in this for loop? Anybody?
1.
Okay. Does everyone understand that? Okay. So I takes this value. You start the for loop on line 3 with this if statement, and what happens in this if statement? Please raise your hand also, because I know that some of you are. I want to pick on people who have been talking a lot. So sorry, to be clear, the question is, on line 3, what's the first thing that happens? Go ahead. So we're not even in the print statement yet. We're in this expression.
Yeah, you're seeing which integer is divisible by 3.
Sure, but I has been assigned the value 1. So like, someone tell me like exactly what happens just in this expression.
like it's not divisible by 3, so move on to the next one.
Sure. So 1 is 1 modulus 3 is 1. 1 equal 1. This expression gets evaluated to 1. 1 is not equal to 0, so this entire expression gets evaluated to false, and then you skip down to the next expression. So someone tell me what they think. What's the first number that's going to be printed on the first iteration through this for loop? Yeah, so 1 is, so it's going to print 1 because 1 is not divisible by 5, 1 is not divisible by 3, 1 is not divisible by 5 again, and so we go down to this, we filter down to this else statement, and then it prints the number 1. So let's, I'm just, spoiler alert, the same thing happens for number 2. So then for number 3, when I has the value 3 on the third time through the loop, what will happen?
Because the first one is true, so it won't move on to the next one. It'll just print this.
Sure. So just to reiterate what you said, this first expression is true. 3 modulus 3 is equal to 0, so we'll print fizzbuzz. So the question is, let's say we're on the 15th iteration. So I has the value 15. Someone raise their hand. What will happen?
I think it should just print fizzbuzz because it will evaluate that the first statement is true and it will move on to the else if I modulus 5 is 0 and
That's correct. Does everyone understand why that will print fizzbuzz? So, okay, all right. So let me rearrange this program to so that it's more correct. Okay, so I'd like to solve this collaboratively if we can. How can the third part of this challenge is to write a program with all the functionality of 2, but the function has 2 arguments. The first argument is the number the number where printing should start, and the second argument is the number where printing should end. So someone let me know how you would change this. I know you guys know. Or just take a swing. So like how would you specify arguments for this function? All right, so it's okay. Oh gosh, it's the most terrifying thing I can hear. All right. So before I'm glad I went over functions before. So if we're just defining any function, our function definition, we can forget a second about what's actually in this function. This is like the skeleton of our function definition. So we have this keyword function. It's followed by parentheses and these curly braces. The arguments are, I'll give you a whole farm. Like the arguments are defined in these parentheses, and you can see that because in the functions we've been using that are defined in R, when you're going to go specify arguments for those functions, you put them in the parentheses. If you want to make a vector of 3 different numbers using just their number values, you would say 4, 6, 2. If you wanted the vector of 4, 6, 2, and that will return, the C function will return the vector to you. If you want to repeat, the number 4 10 times, the first argument you give it is the thing you want to repeat. Then there's a named argument of how many times you want to repeat that thing, and you get a vector of 4 10s back. So when you're defining a function, you just got to think about what do you want the function to look like when you're using it in the R console or when you're using it later on in your program. And by what do you want it to look like, I mean like what pieces of data do you want to give to your function to compute some output? So let's bring our code back in here. So this challenge wants us to. This challenge at the very minimum wants us to have a function that has 2 arguments. So we can name these arguments with whatever variable names we want. So we can call them x and y. And when you specify these variable names, you just separate them with commas inside of inside of the parentheses after the function. Does everyone do you understand that? And do you understand that in the context of what I was saying before about scope? If you don't, please say you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about, please, because I realize that I'm missing something here. All right. So now we have two arguments for this function, and we want this function, instead of printing between 1 and 100, we want it to print between whatever the first argument of the function is and whatever the second argument of the function is. So does someone have an idea about how we might change the code that we have now in order to do that? Yeah?
You give x and y a number and say I in x and y?
Sure. So we do exactly that. We can use variables to create vectors. So maybe this is a point of confusion, is that we can use variables to create vectors using the colon operator. So if we're just in some script and we say, all right, this variable called first is going to get the value of 5, and this variable of second is going to get the variable 10, and we execute that code. You can use the colon operator with these variables. So we can say first colon second, and what will we get back from this? Yes, exactly. Yeah, bless you. So we can create a vector in the same way in this for loop. So we can say for I in x colon y, and then that is the function. We have created FizzBuzz3. Sure, so you could do that if you wanted to set default arguments. So right now, let's take a look at it without default arguments. So if I execute this code, it enters into the R console, and then I can use the function. If I try to just say, before with FizzBuzz2, we didn't have to provide any arguments, and it printed 1 through 100. So now if we do FizzBuzz3 and we don't provide any arguments, we get an error, because x and y have if we don't provide arguments, x and y have no meaning inside of the environment of this function. Does that make sense? Does that sentence I just said make sense? That if we don't provide arguments, okay, okay, okay. So if we provide arguments, they can be as small as from 3 to 5. It'll print fizz for buzz. We can say from 1 to 100, and we'll print what we had before. We can say, we can put in any 2 integers, and it will print buzz if it's divisible by 5, fizz if it's divisible by 3, fizz buzz if it's divisible by 3 and 5, or it will print the number. So now we have generalized this function and this program of printing a number fizz buzz or fizz buzz to be able to print that given any 2 integers. Does it make sense what I've done? Okay.
You've turned it into a mathematical function, essentially. Like in variables.
Yeah, sure. It's a mathematical function in the sense that it's that you take 2 numbers and you get some result as a function of those 2 numbers. And then to be, let's say for some reason that usually when we're doing fizz buzz, we want it to happen between 1 and 100. We can set default values so that when we go to run the function, we don't need to provide any arguments. So if I say up here in the function definition that x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 100, and then I